Hello, my friends. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Flora, speaking out. It was 2 or 3 weeks ago I spoke of my very clear memories of the speech Roosevelt gave to both houses of Congress, December 8, 1941, 85 years ago, just after being attacked by the Hirohito, Japan, at Pearl Harbor with thousands of casualties. He went to the Congress, as I said, and asked the Congress to declare war. It was a unanimous vote to do so, with only one dissenter. You know, there are very few of us left who have a clear memory of those days, that war. I was 13 years old, and I want to share some memories with you about that war, particularly compared to what we're seeing now. Overnight, everything changed. The draft went into full effect. All men between the ages of 18 and 45 had to register for the draft. Overnight, all of my young men cousins, including one in his 40s who was a physician who volunteered, thousands of people volunteered, by the way. All my cousins, all our young men friends, my sister's fiancés, all swept up in the draft of volunteering. Factories went on full speed ahead, making planes, munitions. Women often volunteered for some of the women's corps, like the WAC, WAVES. They were not allowed to fight, but they worked in administrative forms, helping out in every way possible. Women who didn't volunteer for the military went into the factories or farms, which meant, in effect, the end of servants for the middle class. We never really got them back again. Women were discovering their power 85 years ago and the need for them. There were shortages, many shortages. Food stamps we had, rationing. Sugar, for example. When one of my sisters decided to get married, we had to borrow sugar coupons from friends to make the wedding cake, things like that. We grew victory gardens in our backyards. I still remember the excitement of working in my own little victory garden, growing at least 5 different kinds of vegetables. Some came up, others didn't. No gas, well, coupons for gas. All unnecessary trips were very greatly discouraged. Shortage of gas, shortage of rubber, no new tires. If your old tires went flat, you just didn't use your car. Silk went out, of course. It was needed for parachutes. And that's when rayon and nylon came into use. Fashions changed. I mentioned that, I remember. Short skirts and shoulder pads gives a sort of military look. Travel. Planes were really completely turned over to the military. Yeah, trains ran, but it was almost impossible to get a seat. Most of us ended up, when we had to take a train, sitting on our suitcases. There were drives that the schools cooperated with to sell war bonds, to sell the books of stamps loaning to the government. There were the scrap metal drives. I still remember how we young people would go on neighborhood visits to try to gather scrap metal to turn over for the war effort. And that's when everyone learned in their kitchens to flatten cans after you'd used them, stamping them till they were flat. Songs, the songs changed. Patriotic songs, of course, like God Bless America by Irving Berlin, who published it in 1938. He was one of those whose family escaped from tyranny overseas. And there were wishful songs, dreamy songs. There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover tomorrow when the war is through. There'll be love and laughter and peace ever after tomorrow when the world is new. Songs. GIs, they call them GIs, singing to their girlfriends. Don't sit under the apple tree with anyone else but me till I come marching home. Crazy songs. Noisy dotes, dozy dotes, little dams of Tivy. Don't ask me to translate that at this point. War was not glorified. The First World War had taught us that. The First World War was very glorified. People cheering the troops, congratulating them for being shipped overseas to take part of this glorious, glorious battles. We knew better now by World War II. We knew it meant death. Well over 400,000 American soldiers died in World War II. Many more in Europe, of course. And over 500,000 American soldiers were wounded. We knew all that was going to happen. No secret. We went into it with great purpose. A united purpose, a united nation, a united Congress. We knew what the war was about. It was to stop the cancerous metastatic warlords, both in Europe and the Far East, from devouring one nation after another. It was not enough for them to destroy liberty and make hell in their own nations. They metastasized. Tomorrow the world, as Hitler said. We knew the purpose of this war. We had been attacked. There was no choice. We knew we had serious, competent leaders who would tell us the truth. They told us the truth when things looked very dark and battles were lost and thousands killed. These serious leaders were not in it for greed or for power or driven into it by intimidation by ego-possessed leaders. It was a war where other nations, still free, were fighting with us. Now, don't get the idea that we were angelic. We did many wrongs before the war. Before we went into the war, we turned away, I think it was 2 ships full of Jewish refugees to send them back to their country that would destroy them. After the war was declared, the enormous injustice and unconstitutional internment of thousands of Japanese American citizens whose sons were actually fighting the war, and turned them for 5 years. There were many examples of cruel, ignorant racism in the armed forces. There was great ignorance still about the effects of war on people with fragile personalities, the effects of post-traumatic stress disorder. Practically nothing was known about that. Yeah, many faults, many sins, many mistakes. Nevertheless, it was perhaps the last war where the moral issues were clear and the nation united, and certainly the last war where Congress, not the president, the Congress pronounced it a legal war. That has not been the case since. What are we seeing now, 85 years later? Those 400,000 young men who died in the war I remember so well, if they were looking at our nation now, what would they be seeing, thinking? They would see a war that has not been pronounced a war by Congress, but still called a war, unless an increasingly vacant-faced president calls it, I quote, a little excursion on the one hand, or an epic fury on the other hand. A vacant-faced president who can't give a clear reason why we chose a war like this. Every time he speaks of it, he emphasizes a different purpose. A vacant-faced president who doesn't give us any kind of a timeline. At one hand, he will say, we've just begun. Then he will say, it's been a tremendous success. Or he will say, and I'm quoting, it's over when I feel it in my bones. Or he will say, you know, it's all in my mind, no one else's. A vacant-faced president who's already talking about taking over Cuba, and who, of course, in this past year has threatened 5 other sovereign nations to try to take them over. Those 400,000 would see a congressional majority, a bitterly divided Congress, but a slight majority and a full presidential cabinet driven by terror of this president or glutted with ambition and fear of losing their votes. They would see a bitterly divided nation. They would see the possibility, a real possibility, of World War III, especially if other nations who've been holding aloof from this war of choice were somehow compelled to helping our nation open up the Straits of Hormuz. Although the president, on one hand, pleads for help from other nations, and on the other hand says, we don't need you, we're the most powerful nation in the world. 8 more months before a congressional election. Almost 3 more years of a president who, the more he is cornered, the more he acts like a wild animal on attack. It's hard, isn't it, not to panic? It's very hard sometimes not to feel despair at our condition. We have a diseased administration, but also, and this is what those 400,000 would see and recognize, their spirit, we have a powerful fighting immune system going on in this country. There's disease at the top, disease at the head, but our immune system, like a basically healthy body, is fighting strong. We are hearing those powerful voices in Congress that will not be silenced. We are hearing the judgments of these powerful federal judges. It's an amazing thing to see these federal judges. We're hearing the voices from the strong street demonstrators. Sometimes people ask me, am I sorry to be alive still at this time? You know, I've outlived all the contemporary members of my family and all contemporary friends. I've outlived every single one of them. But when asked if I'm sorry to live to see this time, I must tell you in honesty, I am, though it is excruciatingly painful to see the condition of our nation, I am proud and honored and glad to be alive so I can join my own memory and my witness to you amazing younger ones, our strong immune system fighting back, keeping the vision. It was 250 years ago that Thomas Paine, in the worst depths of despair by many in the Revolutionary War, our soldiers were losing, it seemed, starving, barefoot in Valley Forge. No way could we win. And then Thomas Paine wrote this famous pamphlet, and you all know the opening words. These are the times that try men's souls. The summer patriot will in this crisis shrink from the service of their country. Tyranny like hell is not easily conquered. But they, the real men, gather strength from distress. And I think those 400,000, I know they would, looking at you, younger people, strong people. They would say the way it had been said of them 85 years ago and 250 years ago. They stood as one. They moved in strength. They sang their visions. They raised their torch and passed it on. Thank you for being with me. See you next week.